A few weeks before the election, I thought I might actually get an interview with Donald Trump. Our executive producer was texting with the campaign's press team. We were like, Trump seems to like going on podcasts. We have a podcast. And they seem to be entertaining it. I had one main thing I wanted to ask him. In his second term, how is he going to treat journalists? Trump's been quite clear about his other goals for his second term, dismantling the civil service, seeking retribution against enemies. And while he certainly has maligned the media a lot, I wanted to use any time I might get with him on this show about journalism to ask what he was thinking about doing to the press, in as much detail as I could get, because I think it's important to know what possibly lies ahead, especially now that he's won. Obviously, the interview was a long shot, but it seemed conceivable enough that I still had to get ready. And that's what today's show is about. My week of preparation for an interview with Donald Trump, the guy who helped me prepare for that interview, and his old wrestling buddy.
From this side, it looks like you guys are just repeating what you're told to repeat from people who are funding whoever you're working for.
This is Question Everything from KCRW and Placement Theory. I'm Brian Reed. Stick around. If I was going to talk meaningfully with Donald Trump about his plans for the press, I wanted to go in with more than just, I know you call us fake news. I wanted to do my due diligence, compile every last thing Trump has ever said about reporters, the press, the media. To do that, I brought in Sam Egan.
It was a doozy of an assignment.
Yeah. Sam produces a political podcast for The New Yorker. He worked at Vice, and he also freelances with our show. It was mid-October, and we told Sam this interview with Trump could come through any moment. We needed a master list of every comment Trump has made about the media since he started running for the presidency in 2015. What Sam came back with was massive. First off, he found this spreadsheet that the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker had put together of just tweets alone from Donald Trump about the media, which totaled well over 2,000. It was overwhelming to behold. My eyes almost glazed over, confronted with it. November 26, 2015, the failing New York Times should focus on fair and balanced reporting rather than constant hit jobs on me. Yesterday, 3 boring articles. Today, 2. August 30th, 2018. I just cannot state strongly enough how totally dishonest much of the media is. Truth doesn't matter to them. They only have their hatred and agenda. And on and on. So terrible, such a disgrace, so wrong, so dirty. Just row after row after row of vitriol towards the press. And that was just the tweets. Sam spent hours scrubbing through Trump's rallies, press conferences, interviews, posts on Truth Social, and pulled together pages of comments, which he's sure are still not comprehensive.
I had 2 days to do this.
You're exposing what a great manager I am. Thank you. So there could conceivably be some that have been missed.
Yeah, there's a ton more, I'm sure.
As Sam created this timeline, basically, laying out Trump's comments about the press chronologically over the past 9 years, he began to see an evolution to the president's remarks. You could break them down into 3 progressive phases. Phase 1 began back in 2015, with Trump the brawler, clapping back, picking fights.
New York tabloidy guy, having this tit-for-tat battle with the press. And he's like, a bunch of them are scumbags, but some of them are good. It's something he frequently said when he was first running. And not exactly
them
so much
being
that,
reporters.
He would say something to the effect of 30% of them are great and 30% of them are all right, but about 15 to 20% of them are horrible, evil people, which is, not great nuance, but any nuance on the media from President Trump is surprising to read in hindsight. And I think after his election is when that kind of started to shift.
Which brings us to Trump's next stage of development in his attitude towards the press.
There was a rally that I believe, if I remember the date correctly, it was February 18th, 2017.
While making the master list, Sam pinpointed what he thought might have been the actual time and place when Trump pivoted from phase 1 to phase 2.
He was in Melbourne, Florida,
doing
a rally. And most of his rallies are kind of the same. And he does his shtick over here about this. He does this shtick about here over this. And then somewhere 20 to 40 minutes in, a lot of the time, he's like, and look over there at the press box. They suck. To hell with them. And everyone's like, ah, and he moves on. But it's typically a line, 2 lines.
So what was different about this, the Melbourne rally?
He launched into this very long... You want me to read it?
Yeah.
I also want to speak to you without the filter of the fake news. The dishonest media which has published one false story after another, with no sources. Even as they pretend they have them, they make them up in many cases. They just don't want to report the truth, and they've been calling us wrong for 2 years. They don't get it, but they're starting to get it, I can tell you that. They have become a big part of the problem. They are part of the corrupt system. Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and Abraham Lincoln, many of our greatest presidents, fought with the media and called them out, oftentimes on their lies. When the media lies to people, I will never, ever let them get away with it. I will do whatever I can so that they don't get away with it. They have their own agenda. Their agenda is not your agenda. In fact, Thomas Jefferson said nothing can be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Truth itself, he said, becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. That was June 14th, my birthday, 1807. It will continue to expose them for what they are. And most importantly, we will continue to win, win, win. Most of his comments prior to that were like, these greasy media guys, like they're out to get, they're unfair to me all the time, And at this point, he is saying, it's not just me. These people are a part of a system that's doing what it's designed to do. And he kind of begins to project himself as like the solution to that system.
If phase 1 was disqualify the press, then phase 2 was demonize us. Like, we're actually not American. We're trying to undermine America. We're in opposition to America.
Exactly. The cabal.
Yeah, what strikes me about it is what you just read, this statement at the rally, this seems researched.
Yeah.
Down to the date that Thomas Jefferson, made a comment about newspapers. Mm-hmm. Actually, he got that date wrong by 3 days. I guess he wanted to say it was on his birthday, but still. Yeah. There's something strategic about it. Mm-hmm. And so this is February 18, 2017. It's the first month of his presidency.
Yeah.
So after having kind of assessed all this, do you make anything more of like why that happened then and what that shift means in retrospect?
I mean, this feels like conjecture, but I think it reads to me like someone who realized they were actually the president and like had to now do this for 4 years at least. You know what I mean? Had to like, this wasn't like even if you're Donald Trump, like you can to some effect duck in and out of the media pre him being the president. You're not the most reported on person alive. And if I had to guess, I mean, like he's in the first month of his presidency, and it's probably setting in that like people are going to write dozens or hundreds of articles about me day in, day out, every day for the next 4 years, potentially beyond that, the rest of my life.
Reading this compilation brought me back to that time, to the first month of Trump's first term, particularly poignant as we're about to enter the first month of term number 2. It brought me back to just how much strife there already was in that short period. Already in that first month, there'd been the Women's March, with hundreds of thousands of demonstrators descending on D.C. and arresting shots on cable news of a sea of pink hats on the National Mall. News organizations had brought in crowd-counting experts who estimated that there were about 3 times as many people at the march than there were at Trump's inauguration, which infuriated him. Trump had also instituted the travel ban from majority Muslim countries that first month, which led to reporters putting out story after story of flash protests and chaos and immigration lawyers rushing to airports across the country. That's what was going on when Trump made that new kind of speech in Melbourne, Florida.
And like right around this time, he uses the term the enemy of the American people for the first time on Twitter, referencing, like the press.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, I know he did that. It's just interesting to kind of think about when it happened.
And to see it
laid out here.
Laid out, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it all is such a blur.
Like it happened the first month of his presidency.
Yeah.
In my head, I would have just kind of compressed it all, and fake news and enemy of the people kind of all happened during his campaign or something. So, phase 1, disqualify the press. Phase 2, demonize. And then in the document, you can see phase 3 begin. Phase 3 is, if the press is bad, if the press is other.
Now what do we do about it? Here are actionable things that we can do.
Phase 3 picked up after Trump left office. After the coverage of January 6th and his impeachment and of the criminal cases against him and of his most recent campaign, Trump started threatening more and more things he and the government would do to the press. So, for instance, not just trying to find leakers who give information to journalists, but threatening to go after the journalists themselves.
That in particular is like a theme that he's returned back to a lot. There's certainly like every administration kind of is like, we need to shore up our leaks. But like, I think he was somewhat unique in being like almost being like, hey, screw going after the leakers. Like, we could go to the reporter. And he starts doing things like, I don't know if you remember that he wanted to go after CBS, wanted to have their FCC license revoked because of the way that they edited the Kamala Harris interview that they did. He attacked the Comcast CEO. He was constantly talking about reshaping libel laws and kind of, hypothesizing live on Truth Social how he's going to sort of materialize his larger qualms with the press that he had for his first term and beyond into like actionable steps to diminish their ability to report on his administration fairly.
In case this wasn't obvious, I never got the interview with Trump. His campaign declined our request. The day after they wrote us that he went on Joe Rogan. Less than 2 weeks after that, he won the election. Which is how Sam and I found ourselves doing this kind of post-mortem analysis on the document he'd made. A document that has only become more foreboding, I'd say, in the days since Sam stopped adding to it.
I don't even think I have it on there because it was in the last week or two. He was talking about like having reporters shot, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's how I ended my last episode.
Yeah.
He talked about it, I believe, the day before Election Day.
Exactly. So, God, that's crazy.
Also new, since Sam finished the document, the Columbia Journalism Review recently reported that a week before the election, Trump's attorney sent a legal threat to both the New York Times and Penguin Random House, demanding $10 billion in damages for libel. And his attorney filed a complaint to the Federal Election Commission about the Washington Post, claiming the way they promoted their coverage amounted to an in-kind contribution to Kamala Harris's campaign. In the last 3 weeks, Trump did sue CBS for $10 billion, which of course is an example of Trump making good on these threats. That's what I'm wondering if we'll come to see more of. This week, Trump named his choice to head up the Federal Communications Commission, a man named Brendan Carr, who has shown a willingness to strip networks of their licenses for choices they make in editorial coverage, even though that's not allowed under FCC rules. He could be in a position to take real action against broadcasters. So I feel like that brings us up to where we are. Now we're at punish.
Yeah. Punish the press, the rubber meeting the road, so to speak.
You have like a slight, I don't know, smirk or grin on your face. Like, why?
I don't know. That's a good question. Probably at some level of an uncomfortable laugh in there. I'm a little bit nervous about it. But also like this is as far as like a journalist, there is no like before time for me. There's a whole class of journalists like this is all that they've ever known. I never knew a like civil media era in the United States.
Right. What's that been like?
That almost feels like asking like what it was like before you were born. I don't exactly know. It sounds nice. What it was like before when I hear stories about it. But on some level, there's like more of a sense of conviction.
What do you mean? Like it gives our work greater purpose in a way?
I think so. And this week I'm struggling with that some.
So we had this document, this odd artifact, which memorializes Trump's evolving relationship with the press in the last 9 years. And now, without an interview with Trump, and with him having just one, I was trying to figure out what to do with it. We seriously considered reading it all aloud, or having AI read it, and releasing a 6-hour podcast of it. It'd be a piece of performance art, basically, like Andy Kaufman reading the entirety of Great Gatsby. We ended up nixing that idea. I'm trying to figure out, what's the value of it? I have a sense that there is value to it, but...
I will share this with you. I had an exchange a couple days ago with a friend of mine from Wyoming.
Sam's from Utah and went to college in Wyoming. He was a D1 wrestler there.
Where I'm from, like most people, I'm the only journalist that they know. They have never, especially people my age, have never met a journalist in their lives, except for me.
How old are you?
I'm 29, just turned 29. So I get roped in these conversations a lot.
And on the day after the election, Sam posted a somber selfie online.
So I was shitposting on my close friend's story on Instagram, expressing my concerns about Trump's rhetoric about the media.
On top of the selfie, he wrote, "Real Weimar Republic vibes at the New Yorker today. Having conversations about what we are all going to do if Trump begins targeting members of the news media. I do not know what timeline I expected to live through, but it was not this one." A guy from Sam's old wrestling team DM'd him.
And he was sort of like, I feel like you're being dramatic. If a Republican did this like the day after the election and Kamala had won, you would call it silly. And I referenced this document. I was like, hey, man, I spent 2 days compiling a 13-page document that I know is not 1,000% comprehensive. There's stuff that's missing. It's still that long of just comments that were like ranging from vaguely threatening to like pointed threats at the media. So I don't really think this is overreacting. And he could not believe it. He did not believe me.
Really?
He was like, share it with me. The only reason I didn't share it is because I don't know what you're doing with it.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm going to,
Oh, wow.
He was like, email it to me, please.
As a Trump supporter?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you're pretty good friends with this guy?
Great friends with this guy.
After seeing the pages of invective, of threats, would Sam's friends still think he was being dramatic? Would he see why Sam was feeling scared as a journalist? It seemed like a conversation worth having in these raw weeks after the election. Yeah. Do you think it'd be interesting to talk to him about it?
Yeah.
Was that Sammy talking to me?
Yes.
It's both of us.
Yeah.
Sammy?
We're both here, and we're not on video just because we're sitting across from each other at a table.
In like a tiny, cramped studio, so you don't have to be on video if you're not feeling it.
Just kind of wanting to see your pretty face, Sammy.
After a quick break, we bring this document Sam made to an old friend of his who doesn't trust journalists, but does trust Sam, to see how the list looks to him. And he makes the case for why we should see it differently. We're going to share the list in our newsletter. You can sign up at kcrw.com/questioneverything. Sam's friend Chaz is 30, married with 2 kids, one brand new, just over a month old. He works for a roofing company in Colorado and is pursuing a professional MMA career. Sam says he's a great fighter. Chaz says he voted for Trump, not particularly enthusiastically, but because he's anti-abortion.
So did you get a chance to look at the sort of master list of Trump statements about the media?
Yes. Yes, and I have it here.
Did you print it out?
Dude, I had it printed out.
What are you, 80? You're a father of 2 now, and you're printing stuff all of a sudden?
Sam sent Chaz the list before we got on the phone. When Sam went to write Chaz, he was a little embarrassed to see in his DMs that in his post-election shitposting mood, when Chaz had chimed in saying it seemed like he was overreacting, and Sam had responded, telling him, if you think I'm overreacting, how about this document I just spent 2 days making? Sam had described the document to Chaz as a list of every time Trump had called for violence against the media, which that's not what this document is. It's mostly insults, accusations, and other kinds of threats.
Honestly, nothing surprised me. I felt like these were things that I've seen or heard him say before.
Looking at Trump's statements laid out chronologically, Chaz quickly noticed the same early evolution that Sam did.
It looked like over time it got progressively more like the media is the devil. From like 2015 when you have here, like much of the press has been terrific or honorable people. I've had amazing people, like 30%, okay, and then it kind of moves towards like they're just the worst people ever and totally dishonest. I tend to lean more towards that direction.
You lean which direction? Just to be clear, you lean towards
more skepticism of traditional news media like TV, newspaper, radio.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty skeptical, and not just of liberal news media, of all news media too. I'm pretty skeptical of what I'm hearing.
Where do you get your news?
I primarily, and might be silly, YouTube.
That's not surprising to me at all. Honestly, I expected you to say YouTube.
YouTube, yeah. I really enjoy long form podcasts, where we get to sit down and listen to people talk a little more human. You know this. I love Joe Rogan. Huge Jordan Peterson fan. When I'm listening to podcasts, it seems more natural to where it's 2 people having a conversation as opposed to like a corporation through one reporter.
To Sam's list, we asked Chaz if there's anything in there that jumped out at him for one reason or another that would help us see how it was landing with him. He turns to a section of a speech Trump gave when the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade had been leaked ahead of time to a Politico reporter. In the document, Sam has summarized this moment as, quote, Trump threatens reporter with prison rape if they do not reveal the identity of the Roe Supreme Court leaker.
I felt like that was a bit of a stretch. Like I thought like it like could that have been heard as a joke? That's how I read it.
Can you just read what? I just want to make sure we're talking about the same part.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Trump states, take the writer and or the publisher of the paper and say, who is the leaker? And they say, we're not going to tell you. They say, that's okay. You're going to jail. And when this person realizes he's going to be the bride of another prisoner very shortly, he will say, I'd very much like to tell you exactly who the leaker is. It reads like a joke to me based off like how he is who he is, brash and not a polished politician in that way.
Even if you take the bride of another prisoner, say that is like, you know, a bit of a
like
joke.
A prison joke. Sure.
I think the idea of a president saying we're going to threaten a reporter with jail if they don't reveal a source. Like, what do you think of that idea?
If there was anything that was done after that, I would take it more seriously. Like if there was any concrete steps to like, all right, we're going to arrest him and question him. Sure, I'd take that seriously. But if it was just that and it was left where it was and there was no follow-up on that whatsoever, then I don't know how you could take it more seriously than Trump being Trump and how he speaks.
Well, that was in 2022 and he wasn't the president. Now, getting back to like what originally spawned this whole conversation, do you see how that could be something that I find concerning?
I guess. I'm not in your world. I'm not a journalist. I mean, you know, I don't doubt your sincerity or your fear in that.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it seems silly for you to be afraid of that. It just seems silly.
So you said that you were aware that that Trump spoke about the press in this way. I'm just curious how his rhetoric, I mean, it's been going on for a decade now. This is how he's spoken about the media for a decade. I'm curious if you think that this has affected your own perception of journalists at all.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I would say his interaction with the media certainly has contributed to more skepticism of traditional news outlets. Yeah.
Chaz tells us about a recent experience he had, trying to figure out what to make of a policy. J.D. Vance said something during the vice presidential debate about how the Biden administration was using asylum laws to grant legal status to immigrants. Chaz was a poli-sci major in college, and he says he's always made a point of seeking out sources from across the political spectrum. So after J.D. Vance made that claim at the debate, Chaz did that.
I started to look into the Harris or the Biden administration, how they were construing these numbers to show that they've actually gotten tougher on the border when it doesn't look like that, but it could look like that based off how they're presenting this information.
Sure.
I looked into it enough to think I don't really know who to believe here. And so what's the point here?
Oh, that's not a very good outcome.
It wasn't.
No,
I mean, it was it was like, yeah, I don't know who to believe.
It's interesting because I think I kind of imagined that you would come out of this with more right-wing conviction, I guess you might call it, if I'm being candid with you. But like, it sounds like usually what you're coming out of this like with is apathy.
Yeah, 100%.
So Chaz goes on to say what's really influenced him, maybe more than what Trump says about the media, is how the media has responded to Trump.
I felt like there was a lot of clickbait over the last 10 years that probably could have been, I don't want to say ignored, but shouldn't have been made into the mountain that the molehill was, I guess.
Chaz gives Sam and me a few examples, pieces of media that he's come across that have contributed to this impression he has. For one, he mentions a book called The Gray Lady Winked, which digs into certain narratives the New York Times has promulgated over the last 100 years, including some stories it got wrong. Perhaps tellingly about the way algorithms really do dictate our media intake these days. Chaz learned about this book on one of the podcasts he listens to, yet neither Sam nor I, nor anyone in this office actually, despite all working in media in New York, had ever heard of it. Chaz also sends us 2 videos that he saw recently. The first is a woman on YouTube talking about how Trump was embraced by the media before he entered politics, which is true, obviously. He was a media personality, part of the industry, basically, for a long time.
Like, literally, guys, I don't know if you guys remember this. Oprah wrote him a letter and was like, if you ever run for president, consider me as your running mate.
She plays a clip of Trump on the Ellen DeGeneres show, circa 2004.
Got engaged.
Correct.
Melania, is that how you said?
Melania.
Melania. And she's going to join us in a minute, and we'll see what you're really like.
Okay.
All right. We'll be right back right after this.
Somebody said he seems like an actual human being here. Yeah, well, he is. Somebody said he seems so kind and gentle. What happened? You guys just started believing the media instead of actually believing him.
And to illustrate the flip, Chaz sends a second video, a mashup of TV news coverage from Trump's first term called Scripted Journalists, All Saying the Same Thing, compilation.
Today was historically bad for President Trump. Today is a turning point.
Today was a turning point.
A turning point. We're at a turning point here.
I gather that Chaz had a similar experience watching this video of the press talking about Trump that Sam and I had reading the list Sam put together of Trump talking about the press.
The beginning of the end for the Trump presidency. I believe this is the beginning of the end.
I do too.
It's really the beginning of the end.
He may be feeling the walls closing in on him.
All the walls closing in on him.
The walls closing in on him.
Trump will resign. Trump is going to resign.
Is this the tipping point? I know we've said it over and over.
You think this is a tipping point?
They have an agenda. I felt like the agenda was, I'm going to try to paint this guy in the worst light possible.
Watching these videos, putting on Chaz's glasses, so to speak, and imagining how many dozens, hundreds of more like them he's viewed over time, I can see from his perspective how journalists look. It's not good. I mean, this show's about how to make journalism better. I don't have some rosy picture of it. As someone who's worked in the traditional media, NPR, the New York Times, what I see in that mashup is groupthink, I see unoriginality, I see cable hosts who make millions of dollars and are disconnected from average voters. I see pontificating that is very unhelpful, if not plain wrong. I see poor business models and managerial decisions that incentivize punditry over real reporting and force programs to chase the same stories night after night in a superficial way. A lot of real failings amidst all the essential and strong reporting that does get done that end up looking to Chaz.
It looks like you guys are just repeating what you're told to repeat from people who are funding whoever you're working for.
That's how it looks.
That's the perception. That's the perception. Not for me necessarily, but that's like the kind of the vibe that I pick up on. When I talk about some of these things, is like journalists tend to have that. Again, I know Sam. You're my only person in my life that is a journalist. I don't even think I met another one. So this isn't Sam, but from like the perception of the media is that they've been weaponized, that they've been bought, that they're told you need to push this right now to sell the story, and that they do it.
Who's pushing this?
I don't. Total conspiracy theory cabal. I don't know who. I'm not saying I am. I'm not saying I'm saying this. I'm saying that that's the perception that I get from a lot of people that I am around.
We're reporting on Trump in a negative light because a secret cabal of sorts, a deep state, and Trump is the person who promises to expose them.
That's a pretty popular thought out there right now.
Do you believe that?
I don't believe it fully. I think that there is probably some deep state stuff going on.
I think Chaz epitomizes what I'm most frightened about in the second Trump term. Here's a guy who wants to be informed. He studied political science. He has close friends like Sam, who he disagrees with, and he's not afraid of engaging with them on their disagreements. He's not some hardcore Trump stan. And yet, his experience trying to inform himself in our current political and information ecosystem has led him to believe that there might be some deep state involvement in how the press is covering the president. And maybe even worse, it has led him to, in some instances, give up on the idea that the truth can be established, to throw his hands up and say, what's the point in even trying? After the election, I had a conversation with Jody Ginsburg, CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Her organization defends journalists all around the world. And she told me this is what she's concerned about too, the environment that Trump's attitude towards the press engenders. She did list a bunch of specific worries that track with things Trump has said. An increase in harassment of reporters, a burst of legal threats and lawsuits. She's worried that a landmark Supreme Court case, Times versus Sullivan, which is the key legal precedent that protects journalists reporting on political leaders against libel claims, could get overturned, like Roe v. Wade was. 2 of the conservative justices have signaled their willingness to revisit it. She's afraid of authorities using subpoenas to go after journalist sources. As of now, she's less afraid of those authorities using actual prosecution and jail time. She's also paying attention to the way the federal government could wield funding to go after the press, cutting off money for public media, but also possibly government advertising budgets, like for the Army or Health Department, which could staunch revenue for some news outlets. All that said, Jody told me,
what I don't want people to think and focus on is, oh, well, as long as Donald Trump doesn't push for the abolition of New York Times versus Sullivan, or as long as he doesn't defund NPR, then everything will be okay. Because it's the small incremental changes that get enabled that create the environment in which damage is done. What we've seen over and over again in all sorts of countries is it doesn't require big, headline-grabbing, sweeping legislative change for severe and serious damage to be done.
I mean, what has he done? What has he done other than like the words?
He's sued a lot of people. He sued the New York Times. He sued Bob Woodward.
Is any of it? Is there any grounds for it, or is it all just like? Do you think that the media has portrayed him in a fair way? Like they haven't ever clipped his things or taken things out of context.
I would not be comfortable saying that the media has never done that.
Yeah, I think that's where I get thrown off. I'm just like, I'm always going to be way more skeptical of a politician than I am of a reporter. I don't care who the politician is.
And I guess that's been blended
that's just
in my
like,
mind.
and I feel like that was the orientation for a long time. Like we're supposed to be aligned with you guys. You know what I mean? Like we're, a civilian press corps.
And that's not what it feels like. Like that's the first time I've heard those words, and I like how that was said. I would love an advocate that I felt like I could trust. Because like I'm not against journalism. I don't think anybody is against like just someone seeing something and like, oh yeah, that look what's going on. I feel like that's how we got the gospel.
I think what Sam was hoping for in this conversation was for Chaz to give a little more ground, to concede that there are plenty of other journalists like Sam, and we aren't just making stuff up. Okay. We're doing our best to do the work in the way we think is right.
If you're attacking the press, like ultimately what you're saying is like you don't trust what they say, and nobody should trust what they say.
Okay.
But if you would humor me and assume for a moment like what the press is like reporting largely is like generally true and typically quite well researched, wouldn't that be troubling?
What would be troubling? His remarks about the press, if I believed that overall journalism as a whole has maintained its integrity in our system
exactly
right now, over the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. I just don't think that's true.
Chaz, can I just put like a thought experiment forward for you?
Let's do it.
I found it interesting when Sam asked you to like kind of just like suspend disbelief for a minute. Imagine that the majority of what we're publishing is true. And then he asked you to like think about what it would mean if Donald Trump was just saying over and over again, what we're doing is dishonest, we're dirty, we're not to be trusted, we're enemies of the American people, we're undermining democracy, we're conspiring against everybody, regular people. Would that be troubling? And you seem to very honestly just be like, yeah, it would be. Can you just inhabit that like reality for a second? Take a second and think about it, and just tell me how it looks when you do inhabit it.
Yeah, but is that all? That scenario, does that include me totally accepting everything that has been said from the media about Trump?
Not everything. I'm asking. I guess the premise I'm asking you to humor
Like if
for this exercise is we're definitely not a cabal, but even aside from that, we are operating in good faith. We do care about the truth. We do care about giving a well-rounded view. When we're looking at something, we're trying to like put it in kind of perspective in the way that feels right based on the evidence, you know?
Sure.
And certain values, I guess, of like transparency and holding power to account and all that. So that's the premise I'm asking you to accept for the purposes of this exercise.
Sure.
And then if you were to accept that and look again at this list of comments that Sam compiled of Trump just talking, saying that the press is totally not to be trusted. Like if you put on those glasses, how does it look?
It would look like his thoughts on the media are totally baseless. And that in a system that's supposed to be designed to operate on an informed public would be troubling. In that exercise, certainly a threat to democracy would be present.
With those glasses on, Chaz could see things the way Sam and I saw them. But of course, the glasses were imaginary. All right, you can take the glasses off, unless you want to leave them on. But, you know.
It felt weird.
Chaz Polson in Colorado. Question Everything is a production of Placement Theory and KCRW. Please let us know how you're liking the show. Leave a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, or hit us up on Instagram at KCRW, at Placement Theory. Today's episode was produced by me with Sam Egan and edited by Neil Drumming. Our show is made by executive producer Robyn Semien, producers Zach St. Louis and Sophie Kazis, and production intern Emily Malterre. Jonathan Goldstein is a contributing editor. Fact-checking by Maggie Duffy. Sound design by Brendan Baker. Our music is by Matt McGinley. Our partners at KCRW include Arnie Seipel, Gina Delvac, Tejal Ajmera, and Jennifer Ferro. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.